spending time with visiting teachers can be useful for reminding us and clarifying aspects of the practice, particularly the older generation of disciples of Ajahn. They give us reflections on how he taught, reminding us about the basic principles of practice of Dhamma Vinaya. They might also remind us why we came into the monastery to take up the training. We're all here for a reason, a purpose. Sometimes it's out of faith in the Buddha and his teachings, sometimes out of faith in a living teacher, sometimes out of a wish just to improve our own meditation practice, and so on. We have different reasons, but we all do have a reason. We have ideals, and this lifestyle of a Buddhist monk and practicing in the tradition of Luang Por Chah, it's a very suitable way of living for developing our spiritual practice, training our hearts and mind with the goal of attaining happiness, peace. When we hear about the way Luang Por Chah taught and ran his monastery, we're reminded of how down-to-earth and pragmatic many of his teachings, practices were. And most of the bhikkhus who lived and practiced with him had a great faith and confidence in him as an enlightened teacher, an Arahant, even with many special qualities, special psychic powers, special knowledges, which is an important background to why people were willing to live, practice with him and give up to the training, to the practice. But in actual day-to-day teaching and running of the monastery, as we know, he didn't talk much about attainments, he didn't emphasize them. He certainly didn't talk much about psychic ability. His teachings were much more practical and applicable for any of us, anyone coming into the robes, into the monastery, whether Thai or foreign. That maybe has been why his Sangha and way of practice has become so popular, successful around the world. As we know, he didn't have any master plan to spread Buddhism around Thailand or around the world. It's happened naturally, organically. And that's because of this great wisdom he used, worldly wisdom, spiritual wisdom, in training others, teaching others, using the conventions, the monastic form, to help monks and nuns to practice for themselves, to learn for themselves, but using the form, using the structure. obviously he had a personal skill in doing this, in using the monastic training to teach the Sangha, but even without him personally being here anymore, it's as if some of him carries on, lives on, through the Sangha and through the way of practice. And that's our good fortune, that we've come in contact with this. Probably all of us will appreciate this, especially the more you practice, the longer you practice, you appreciate the value of this way of training. But as I mentioned, often wasn't anything special or the higher dhammas and the aspects of the practice of meditation that are harder to describe in words weren't always what he was emphasizing or talking about. The way of training often seemed very, very simple, direct. His teachings were very direct, pointing to very obvious things and often just reminding monks what they should be doing, how to train in the Vinaya, how to develop mindfulness, how to reflect, contemplate. Not necessarily very always giving wise explanations of deeper and profound aspects of the Dhamma, but often just pointing people just to the very truth that's arising in the present moment, coming back, bringing them back to their own state of mind in the present moment. How mindful we can be from moment to moment, or how we can lose our mindfulness and get caught up into our own craving and defilement. A lot of his teaching was pointing to this, bringing people back to the present moment. So we have this way of training that's become familiar, not just in this monastery, but around the other branch monasteries. We use the training in the Vinaya, learning the rules, putting them into practice in daily life, learning the pariyatti, studying suttas, listening to Dhamma teachings, explanations, discussion, but again using that as a basis for practice, not as an end in itself, not studying for study's sake or to become a great scholar maybe, but more for supporting the practice, for the development of wise reflection, the development of understanding of the principles that underlie good practice of the Eightfold Noble Path that is leading to the end of suffering. He encouraged us to put effort into whatever we do in the monastery. So learning the Vinaya, we are encouraged to learn the Patimokkha as a training in itself, just to develop mindfulness, learning the chants, the words, remembering, training our memory, developing samadhi in the chanting of the Patimokkha. And anyone who's done it will know it can be the cause for the arising of samadhi. But also for reminding us of the rules themselves. If you learn the Patimokkha, well, you're learning the Pali, but you tend to look at the translation, the explanation, so it helps you to remember the rules themselves. And if you've invested all that time learning the Patimokkha, then in your daily life you're more likely to practice and follow those rules, respect the rules, and see them as an integral part of your training for the higher Dhamma of ending suffering. Whether you learn the chant or not, we still have to learn the rules, abide by them, and use them as a basis for our training. We learn to follow the monastic routine they say the schedule, the different ways of training. We learn to meditate using different techniques. So over again, Luang Por Chah's teaching was bringing us back to these basic principles, Dhamma Vinaya, training in what we call the dry sikha, sila, samadhi and panya, refining our knowledge, our understanding, but then also refining our mindfulness, gradually developing samadhi and developing insight. So he encouraged us to do things well. Learning, if we learn a chant, we'll learn it well. Learn to memorize that chant fully. Learn the right pronunciation. Learn to be able to chant from memory. Because it's much more rewarding if you do that. If you learn a chant, whether it's the evening chants, the reflections, the patimokkha, the parittas, you're remembering the words of the Buddha or commentaries that point to the Dhamma. And those words, some of them will stay in your mind maybe for your whole life. You know, the things we learn as monks, if we put effort into learning them well, they're a lifetime investment. You learn to chant well, 30 years later after learning the patimokkha, you might still remember it. Reflections that you've learned in your first year or two as a monk can stay with you your whole life. They can pop up at the right moment to remind you of Dhamma when you may be losing sight of the Dhamma and craving defilements taking over your mind. In the same way, the practices we learn, you learn to sew robes, wash robes, fold robes, look after your robes, wear the robes. You will learn to look after your alms bowl, fire your bowl, and so on. All these basic practices you learn. Ajahn Chah emphasizes, you learn them, learn to do them well. There's a lot of them you'll carry through as long as you're a bhikkhu, and if you stay a bhikkhu your whole life, you'll keep up those practices your whole life. They're not like, say, just kind of kindergarten practices that you learn for a year or two and then set aside. If you're really looking to train yourself, well then you put effort into them, learn to do them well, and then they become part of your daily routine, part of the way you do things, whether you're here or in another monastery as you go around the world. Because that's what bhikkhus tend to do these days. We travel more. Travel is easier and we can go further because of technology. But you take your practices with you. But similarly, if you don't put effort into learning the chanting, learning to look after your bowl, your robes, all those sort of basic things, well, maybe one day you find you don't have a lot to help you and support you when you do move around from monastery to monastery or even stay on your own. Maybe there's not much left of the bhikkhu if you don't have these basic practices. Ajahn Chah was always encouraging us to develop samana sanya. So looking after your bowl and robes, learning to chant, learning to meditate, both samatha and vipassana meditation. You know, these are the nuts and bolts of being a bhikkhu. And you take them with you wherever you are, however long you've been a bhikkhu. Another very essential part of our training is charyavata. We learn to serve the sangha, because the sangha is one based on hierarchy, just of whoever comes into the monastery first sits first. Whoever ordains first becomes the senior one, whoever ordains second, third, and so on, they become the junior. And it's just natural over time as a sangha expands. We have monks who are much more senior to you living in the same monastery, not just the teacher but sometimes other monks. Ajahn Chah emphasized the value of service through a charyavata. Washing the bowls of senior monks, washing the robes of senior monks, assisting them, because it develops a very strong sangha, that sense of mutual respect for senior monks, and also there's something you get in return. You get contact with senior monks. They can share reflections, they can give you support when you need advice or having a hard time and so on. It's a very beautiful thing to see as well in this world, which tends to be nowadays a world based around individualistic pursuit of happiness, wealth, rights, entitlements and so on. The act of service, which is actually practiced physically, sometimes you do things for another bhikkhu. It's going against the train of the kilesas, which are what run the world and people's hearts. It's teaching you in a very direct, obvious way in your daily life to give up some of your own selfish desires based on kilesa. They're very useful training, especially in the early days when we come into the monastery. If you live in Thailand, so if you live at a monastery like Wat Nong Pong, Ajahn Chah's monastery, you always hear the phrases tanha, ditthimana, craving, conceit, and the attachment to views are the causes of suffering in the minds of newly ordained bhikkhus. Obviously they might still be there in senior bhikkhus, but tend to be a little bit reduced or more managed. But in the beginning, this is what's causing us suffering when we come into the monastery. And we all know it, the new person's always full of views and opinions, desires and wishes. They have their strong self-view, comparing themselves to others, better than, same as, worse than. Charyawatta is a very good practice just to help manage craving, conceit and views, because you have to let go of some of that if you're going to serve somebody else. If that other senior bhikkhu you're serving happens to be one you don't particularly like, or your character is not the same, you don't particularly connect with, all the better, because it will expose your craving, your ditthimana, and you have a chance to let go of it quicker. See it, see the suffering it causes, maybe the reactions you have in your mind as you're practicing a Charyawatta, but then you let go of it. It's just one example of how Luang Por Chah taught and encouraged us to practice as a way to get right down to the direct practice of seeing kilesa, observing kilesa and letting it go, seeing craving as it arises in daily life. Not just with the Acharyawatta, but any aspect of the monastic form. The other way you would emphasize in training is just the routine. Attending meetings of the Sangha. This is entirely what the Buddha taught. You meet together, you come together, you leave dispersed together. Whether it's chanting, meditation, the meal, chores, any aspect of any Sangha meeting, that's how we practice. So it exposes craving, ditthimana. Maybe there's certain practices we don't like, don't want to attend, don't want to get involved with. So you start to see craving come up. Some people have trouble getting up in the morning, they don't like to attend events in the morning meetings, chanting, morning chores. Some people have trouble late at night, they don't want to be around late at night. Some people are just distracted. They don't turn up at different times that are set, for the meal or whatever. Obviously, in the course of our daily life, there may be times when we have duties or reasons that we can't attend some Sangha meeting. And that's just taken for granted. But the way Ajahn Chah taught us, if you don't have any particular reason, then ask yourself, why am I not turning up on time? Why am I not there, or why am I not there? And start to look at your mind, what's underlying your actions in that particular case. And one time he gave a talk, I remember listening to it, he said, if you turn up to the meditation meeting after the senior monk, the abbot, the teacher, you should feel embarrassed. If you think about the teacher, how much more work they have to do to run the monastery, teach Sangha and laity, etc. If they can turn up to a meeting and you're turning up after, why is that? Obviously there may be a genuine reason when we're sick or having to do some other work for the Sangha or something. But if it's just through our carelessness or heedlessness, we'll become aware of that. That's craving. Maybe we've been caught into some distraction, or maybe we're just giving in to our mood. We're feeling lazy or depressed or fed up, whatever. It's these very ordinary situations which start to expose our state of mind for us to work with, to practice. Sometimes to be patient with, sometimes to actually go against the train of our thinking, our mood, our view. Just very simple aspects of monastic life help us do this. This is the way Ajahn Chah taught. You use the routine, the meetings, the practices to see where your mind's at. Are you with the practice that you're doing? If you're eating your meal, a meal isn't very long, it's only 15-20 minutes you eat your meal. Within that 15-20 minute period, how many times does your mind drift away into thinking, even as you're eating, daydreaming, fantasizing, planning, caught into moods, or sometimes just the desire for food makes you just want to speed through your meal, eat it very quickly, just through pure desire. The meal is something we do every day. You eat your food every day, but it's in a structured way. We have a set time, we turn up, we eat the meal in a certain way, we distribute the food, receive the food, distribute it, eat in the bowl. It's an ideal, controlled situation where you can see your mind at work. You can see if craving is arising or not. Every day you can do it. It's a bit like a controlled experiment. Yesterday your mind was all over the place. Well, today, where is my mind? Is it with the food? Is it with the eating? Or is it somewhere else? A lot of the practice is very repetitive, very simple, straightforward activities. But that's ideal for seeing the mind and seeing craving at work. And if you learn to become aware of your attitudes and what's going on, your mental activity as you follow the routine, follow the daily practices, as well as when you're at your kuti, how well you spend your time, sitting, walking, what are you doing at your kuti in your own time. If you use all of these as an opportunity to practice, well, then it's a very good system of training. As I mentioned, he said, whatever you do, try to do it well. Whether it's a simple task like just cleaning or washing your bowl, or the more refined, more challenging tasks like walking meditation, sitting meditation. Try not to do them in a perfunctory way, meaning you're just doing it to fill in the time because you've been told to do something or because you feel it might be a good idea. But actually use every activity to develop mindfulness, to observe craving arise, observe your mind. Obviously a lot of the time we can't just let go of our craving, our moods. We have to be patient. That's another reminder he always gave, be patient. Often that's all you need to do with certain moods, certain states of mind. You just patiently watch as you pace up and down on the walking meditation path. You patiently watch as you sit. You patiently watch as you clean the hall or whatever. And you find the mood passes, arises and passes away, and you get that insight into anicca. When we study the suttas and the Vinaya, we get the theoretical knowledge from the Buddha's enlightened mind. The Buddha already told us the 5 khandhas, this body and mind, nama rupa, are anicca, dukkha, anatta. 5 khandhas are just arising and passing away according to karma. The body is just made up of the 4 elements. Nobody owns it, it's not self. It's just dukkha because the elements are constantly changing. They never stay stable. So they constantly give us pain and discomfort. And it's impermanent. We already know that. But then we're having to bring our minds to see it in daily life, know it in daily life, to train the mind to see, understand these teachings. So we use the monastic training as a backdrop for this, and to see the dukkha of a human body. We're always wriggling around. We can't sit still for very long. Pain comes. Can't walk for very long. We get tired. We get hot, we get cold. We get hungry and thirsty. All of this is where craving arises. And before your meal, every day, just watch to see how craving arises, a desire for food, just for food itself, or for particular kinds of food. And that's the craving is what takes over the mind. The actual need of the body is one thing, so we do have to eat, but then what we think about it is separate. The preferences, I like this food, I don't like that food. I want this, I don't want that. That's separate from just hunger and the need to sustain hunger, overcome hunger. So you use the wise reflection, I eat not for fun, not for beautification, not for fattening, only for the maintenance and nourishment of this body. Is bringing mindfulness and wise reflection into a very simple, repetitive daily act of eating. If you do that well, by the end of your meal, maybe you're more peaceful than the beginning. You have more samadhi than at the beginning. It sounds strange, and most people find they've completely lost their samadhi by the end of the meal, and hence go off having filled the bellies and start talking, enjoying things, doing other things, now that they've got what they wanted. Ajahn Chah used to say, well, that's the heedless way to do it. The careful way, the mindful way, is to maintain mindfulness, not let the mind fall into craving. With that level of restraint, effort, mindfulness, by the end of the meal, maybe you're so peaceful you don't want to talk to anyone or do anything other than just carry on maintaining mindfulness. Mindfully wash your bowl, collect your robes and head off to your kuti maybe, or to whatever other activity you have to do. A lot of Ajahn Chah's teaching is very simple, very direct. Where does craving arise and how does it affect us? Well, it leads us to want to eat more and have more variety, more amount of food, talk more, sleep more. So the teaching he would use perhaps most often is eat little, speak little, sleep little. It's basically giving us an instruction to go against craving and how it affects us. What does craving do? It makes you talk a lot. When we're happy with Gama Danha, Bhava Danha, excited, planning, we're stimulated in that way, well, we talk based on that. When we're caught into Vipava Danha, well, we also talk. We complain, we gossip, backstab, and so on. When we're enjoying ourselves, we're getting plenty of food, getting the things we want, the requisites we want. We talk a lot, we're happy, we're stimulated. When we're not getting on, maybe we go into a silence based on aversion. There's different ways craving will come up, but it will affect us, what we talk about, how much we talk, socializing. Sometimes it's just the pain or discomfort of the body. We seek distraction, so we go and find someone to talk about. Sometimes it's more subtle, the worldly dhammas, the desire for reputation, desire for pleasure of company, so we go off looking for lay people. Ajahn used to say, as monks become more senior, they're always trying to hang around the kitchen, talking to lay people. Maybe they give some Dhamma reflections, but there's also that desire to get some lay support, get things from the lay people, look at the lay people, talk to them, indulge in that. So it's one of those amazing things at Wat Pah Pong, even to this day, you never see monks hang around the kitchen. It's been one practice that's been very well preserved at Wat Pah Pong. Monks don't go off to the nun section to talk. They can live in the monastery and hardly ever even see a nun, let alone talk to a nun. And they don't hang around the kitchen. If you go to Wat Pah Pong in the middle of the day, the kitchen is empty. Even after the meal, you never see monks going over to the kitchen. It's just one of those monastic forms or cultures that become established, that it's not the right thing to do because it's following craving. Eat little, sleep little, talk little. These are reflections in themselves. If you stay at Wat Pah Pong, you get that morning bell or the drum, depending on the era, at 3 a.m. You can never get much sleep at Wat Pah Pong. Even to this day, if I go and stay there, you just sleep a couple of hours at night. You tend to, the earliest you might go to sleep at night might be 10 o'clock. Usually it's later. Often 2 a.m. you're already up again. If you're at Wat Pah Pong, 2 a.m. already monks are walking around, candles are lit. It's a place you don't sleep. In the middle of the day, it's not easy to sleep either. Often there's things you have to do, or you're just out of embarrassment. You want to be sitting and walking, you don't want to be sleeping. It's a place that has a reputation. You don't talk much to lay people. You don't talk much amongst yourselves. You wash your bowl, quietly separate, go off and do your practice. You don't sleep much. You don't eat much. You eat mindfully in your bowl, and then that's it for the day. You're gone. These are the basic trainings that lead to strong mindfulness, strong commitment to the practice, and lead to insight. These are the supportive conditions for our practice. Ajahn Chah said sometimes monks would come to him and complain that they wanted to just practice on their own, say in a retreat situation. And of course that might be appropriate sometimes, stay in a hermitage or in a cave. But he said if you're in the monastery and you come out to the evening meeting, there's a meditation and then there's a chanting, maybe a talk, maybe not. If you think about it, if you can't maintain your mind in a wholesome state through that, then don't expect to be able to maintain your mind in a wholesome state if you go off and live on your own in a cave or a hermitage somewhere. This is almost like a daily measurement, reflection on where is your practice. If you come out to the meeting, if there is a meeting, and you're sitting there with negative mind states, complaining about other monks, complaining about the monastery, one form of craving or another, or just fantasizing about things, planning where you want to go in the future and so on. If that's how you're spending your time, We are just following craving. This will not lead to samadhi, this will not lead to any higher dhammas, as long as you follow craving. So you take it as a challenge. So if you come to a meeting, morning meeting, evening meeting, can you maintain your mind with wholesome dhammas throughout that whole meeting? Not give in to the hindrances, not give in to sleepiness, not give in to aversion, not give in to fantasies based on sensual craving, and so on. That's your challenge. He said if you can do that, you can maintain your mind in a wholesome state for an hour or two. Well, you'll already be in samadhi. That's how samadhi arises. It arises out of these practices. Maintaining mindfulness as you go through your daily routine, washing your bowl, eating, cleaning, sitting, walking, meditation. If you maintain mindfulness, then this is where samadhi will grow, where the mind becomes firm. As the mind becomes firm with the continuity of mindfulness, wholesome states of mind, then there's a chance for insight, and deep insight as well. Actually a chance to abandon craving, not just recognize craving or have to put up with it with patience, but actually abandon craving, which is the aim of our practice. And this is what leads on to Magga Phala Nibbana. It's the abandoning of craving. How do we do that? Well, we maintain our mindfulness first, and little by little, like that fisherman Ajahn used to say, the fisherman who sort of got a fish in his net. It's under the water. He knows there's a fish there, but he has to gradually pull the net together, pull it in until he's got it. It's like that. You're gradually pulling your awareness in back to your own five khandhas, to your body, your mind, and nama-rupa in the present moment, through the day, through your activities, till you've got it right there. You've got your hands around the fish, till you've got your mindfulness and wise reflection overseeing your mind from moment to moment, and it can't disappear anywhere. Can't disappear into sleep, can't disappear into fantasies based on craving, doesn't disappear into anger and aversion or different moods, but it's right there. And you're able to reflect with right view and let go of all the different kinds of craving and conceit and views that arise. For most people, that's an organic, kind of natural process of training, maybe many years of training, getting to the point where you can maintain that steadiness of mindfulness and keep reflecting on craving and attachment that arises. A few people can do it very quickly. It's not unheard of that you get an anagarika, wabapong, and then it might attain deep states of samadhi. Even jhana, it's possible. But most people don't. Most people are just quietly hauling in the net, pulling in the net, getting closer to the fish. In most people it's just a continuous practice, continuing to train yourself in these very basic ways. Eating little, sleeping little, talking little, practicing a lot, and doing the things you do well. Over time, it starts to bring its reward. You get that sense of inner satisfaction, inner contentment that comes from practicing well and developing more wholesome states of mind. You gain more insight, start to see the impermanence of life, and the mind gets weary of following craving. And that's the purpose of it, is to give that clarity of insight. Clear vision, clear knowledge and vision of the way things are. Jnana dasana. If you maintain mindfulness and keep contemplating and using the monastic form as a backdrop, things become clearer and more obvious to the mind. And you don't have to struggle to do it, it's just obvious. This body, this mind are anicca, they're dukkha, they're anatta. You can't control things, you can't control your body, can't even control the mind. And the way mental activity arises, passes away, the impermanent nature of the khandhas, the ownerless nature of the khandhas. You can't control any of that, and you can't control the world around you. These insights become more and more obvious. You start to see, your own body is just basically you're dragging a corpse around with you. There's no future for this body. It's just destined to get old, sick, and die. You see that in your own body. You see that in other people's bodies. Everyone else in this monastery is just the same. We're all destined to get old, sick, and die. Everyone who visits this monastery is destined to get old, sick, and die. There's nothing to get infatuated with, lost in, desire for, with craving. It's impermanent. Mental states are the same. Mental activity, consciousness. It's arising, passing away, according to causes and conditions. And keep reflecting on that. And nothing lasts. Even the peace, the more refined bliss of samadhi, it doesn't last. You come out of samadhi, you still have to deal with the pain of a body, the impingement of living in the world, sense impingement. But the samadhi is the foundation, the solidity of mindfulness that helps you to reflect on all that impingement, reflect on the dukkha of a body, so that it doesn't give rise to craving anymore. You're abandoning craving and just knowing, this is the way it is. Pain is just pain, pleasure is pleasure. Healthy body is like this, a sick body is like that. Build a new building, not long it starts to get old and age. Maybe I even have to replace it one day. Pleasant experiences come, then they go. If you keep reflecting, then there's nothing much that the mind is fooled by. We're no longer caught into the delusions of a perception, expecting the world to be different than it is. The mind comes in line with the world. So one way they used to describe Ajahn Chah is they say everything he does is he's just normal. And the word in Thai is bokati. He's just kind of normal, understanding the way things are with a sense of normality and clarity in mind. So his behavior is just normal. This is one of the attractions of living with a teacher. Enlightened teacher is that exposes the unenlightened behavior, views, opinions, speech, actions of the people around them. The people living with Ajahn Chah are constantly getting a reflection, this is kilesa. So the wise person with right view goes back, works harder to let go of their kilesa. It's like in the time of the Buddha, it's the same. Maybe the Buddha himself, already having developed bharami over so many lifetimes to become a fully enlightened Buddha, sometimes wouldn't have to teach that much in terms of giving long, elaborate descriptions of the Dhamma, talking to people for hours and hours. Sometimes just the purity of mind of an enlightened Buddha or an enlightened Arahant is enough to expose the unenlightened minds of people around. So anyone dedicated to the practice, it starts to become obvious what is kilesa. Because if you're around somebody who doesn't exude or behave according to kilesa, then your own kilesa become exposed, don't they? Your greed, your anger, delusion becomes obvious. That's one of the good fortunes of coming across enlightened teachers, is that they show you what enlightenment is like just through very ordinary, normal behavior, undefiled behavior. And you get a very good reflection back on what is defiled behavior. And if you're honest and sincere in your practice, well, that's where you have to practice. You turn back to look at your mind and work with it. You can no longer blame others or put the responsibility on others. You have to put it on yourself and accept, kilesa, this is my duty, my job. So if we put effort into the practice, we have a very good teacher, a very good way of training. All that's left really is for us to do our practice and then experience the benefits of it for ourselves, our families, for society as a whole. So for tonight I'll leave you with these reflections.